And we start with a Fox News alert as Republicans prepare to outline their plan to overhaul America's tax system. How would you like that job?
No, I would not.
One day after the Senate stalls on health care yet again. Hello and welcome to the second hour of Happening Now. I'm John Scott.
And I'm Heather Childers. They're going to try something else, see if they can get this accomplished. President Trump hitting the road, in fact, for his big announcement. He's about to take off for Indianapolis. That is where the president will lay out his framework for tax reform. That will happen at the Indiana State Fairgrounds this afternoon, while GOP lawmakers left the Capitol for a closed retreat on tax reform. That's ahead of their public rollout later today. And counselor to the president, Kellyanne Conway, saying that the GOP plan will encourage companies to bring jobs back to America.
I think the most important point, Abby, is that most of the country thinks of themselves as middle class, and most of the polling. And so people need a tax break. Also, we need to reduce the rate on job creators. We have encouraged American businesses to park their wealth and their jobs overseas. We need to encourage them to keep those factories, those plants, and, of course, American jobs here in America.
We have Fox team coverage. Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel is live from Capitol Hill. But we begin with White House correspondent Kevin Corke in Indianapolis, where the president will be pitching this plan. Kevin.
Hey there, John. You know, we like to say it's pretty simple, right? At least in theory. The idea being you want to lower corporate taxes, you want to lower taxes on the middle class, and in the process you would stimulate the economy and hopefully spur great growth for the U.S. economy and make us more competitive globally. But as we are fond of saying on Wall Street and on Main Street for that matter, the devil is in the details. Now, let me just share a bit of what we know so far, and I think this is important. The president is expected to talk about reducing the number of tax brackets down to 3 from the current number of 7. That should be, the standard deduction for families will certainly increase. In some cases, John, they will be doubling. As for the corporate tax rate, here's what White House Chief Economic Advisor Gary Cohn told Fox News. The president has made it very clear that 20% as a corporate tax rate is a red line for him. He's at 20%. I think the president made it very clear that there has to be a middle income tax cut. I think those are his 2 big, bright red lines. Interesting, by the way, that 20% number is still higher than what they hoped for originally at 15%, but I think it's a recognition that 20% will still do what they hope to do. But as you can well imagine, the critics are already out there. In fact, some are ripping the president's idea even before he speaks here in the Hoosier State this afternoon. Among them, Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders. Let me share just a bit of what he had to say, the former presidential candidate. No surprise here. He said this about the president's tax plan. At a time of massive wealth and income inequality, President Trump's tax plan is morally repugnant and bad economic policy. He goes on to add, the last thing we should be doing right now is providing hundreds of billions in tax breaks to the wealthiest people and most profitable corporations in this country. I want to give you just a couple of other nuggets here, John, real quickly. We understand the income tax credit for children will also be going up. The child tax credit, that's a very big sign for middle-class families. And also we're told that the so-called death tax and the AMT will also be done away with, according to this plan. We'll see what that does to the economy if, of course, they can get over the finish line. You heard Heather say it. They're back at it again, hoping that maybe finally they can get something major done here with help from congressional lawmakers. John.
Let's see. We'll be watching. Kevin Corke, thank you.
Well, as the president travels to Indiana to talk about tax reform, GOP lawmakers are preparing to make a push for their plan on Capitol Hill. And that is where we find Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel, and he is live with more on that. Hi.
Heather, good afternoon to you. Tax reform is expected to be the dominant topic here on Capitol Hill this fall, and there is great pressure to get it done. Some key points of this plan are slashing that corporate rate from 35% to 20%, lowering the top individual or family bracket from 39.6% to 35%, and collapsing 7 individual brackets to 3. Today, the Senate Majority Leader is calling for both sides to work together on behalf of the American people.
Many of our Democratic colleagues have voiced support for overhauling our tax code, and throughout this process, I hope they will choose to work with us in a serious way. A fundamental overhaul of our tax code is a daunting task. We have a lot of work ahead, but America deserves it.
This will be a big test to see if Republicans can find unity, which was a huge problem with health care reform.
I think the principles that should govern tax reform are growth, fairness, and simplicity. Number one should be growth. The focus should be jobs and economic growth. And I think there are a lot of elements that we're hearing that are encouraging in that regard.
Democrats are pushing back on tax relief for upper-income Americans, but they say they want to be part of the process.
If they want to bring forward a tax cut plan, let's have hearings. Let's have people. I think one of the things we found in there with their Trump Care plan, when you kind of spring it a couple hours before the vote and nobody's seen it, that's not a way to do it.
Republican leaders say they are well aware the American people are counting on them to get it done on tax reform. Heather?
They couldn't do it on health care, at least not so far. Mike Emanuel, live for us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Earlier on Happening Now, we spoke with Senate Majority Whip John Cornyn of Texas about the GOP tax reform proposal. The senator explaining why he sees these changes need to happen now.
Right now, the tax code has become so complex and so larded with deductions and credits and the like that are the product of people working through their lobbyists here on Capitol Hill that we need to reduce rates for everybody, eliminate those deductions and subsidies as much as possible, and get the economy growing again. This will be the best economic stimulus I think we could possibly pass here in Washington, D.C.
Joining us now, A.B. Stoddard, Associate Editor and columnist for Real Clear Politics, and Vince Colones, Editorial Director for the Daily Caller and host of WMAL Mornings on the Mall. So we are fresh off the heels, A.B., of another repeal and replace defeat for Republicans in the United States Senate. What are the prospects for tax reform?
Well, you heard the majority leader say it's daunting. Senator Bob Corker, who was on America's Newsroom this morning, is also talked about how challenging this is going to be. He has said that if you thought that health care reform was a problem, it was going to be, it looked like a piece of cake after tax reform. What they did today was unifying and exciting. They released some principles that make it look like they're going to do a lot of drastic cutting. And some of it well aimed at the middle class. The problem is we just don't see a lot of details about how they're going to pay for it. And the big rift, the principal rift in the party, John, is always over sort of fiscal rectitude, a smaller government, and focus on debt and deficits and shrinking of federal spending. If they go all in for something that isn't truly paid for and therefore isn't truly permanent, they will still be fighting amongst themselves with the elements like the House Freedom Caucus, who have been looking for a debt reduction, deficit reduction, and waiting to be in power with a Republican president for this to happen. So if you're going to be funding big tax cuts through the deficit, there will be a big fight ahead.
I'll just mention that the president's Marine One helicopter is touching down as we speak, taxiing over to Air Force One, and the president will be taking off for Indiana, as we said earlier. He is very much on board with this tax proposal, Vince, and I wonder whether that might make the difference here. He wasn't necessarily always as involved in the health care reform plans, the various ones that came before the Congress.
Well, he cares a lot about this. In fact, that's one of the more interesting points here, that he's been pushing for this 15% corporate tax rate. The outline we're seeing today has it at 20%. I'm a little curious why they decided to start at 20, because this is an outline that they expect to get Democratic support on, meaning they're going to have to move some of the pieces of this closer to what Democrats won. And starting at 20 seems like they've already given away a little bit heading into this. A.B. mentioned the House Freedom Caucus and how important it is that conservatives come around to this if the president wants to succeed. And we know right now that the House Freedom Caucus does support the broad outline of this tax plan as released today, which is a big victory for the president as he steps up to this stage in Indiana. He's going to really want to make sure that the Republican Party fully supports this, because he's going to be seeking a couple of those Democratic votes. People like Senator Joe Manchin, get them to support this plan, and maybe if they have to, move a couple of the pieces closer to what the Democratic Party would be happy with.
Yeah, also Joe Donnelly, as it happens, is a Democratic senator representing Indiana, and curiously, that's where the president is going to make this big announcement today. A.B., what about Democrats? What are you hearing from the Hill? Are any of them inclined to jump on board?
Yes, they are. The House Problem Solvers Caucus has 23 Republicans, 23 Democrats. They've already met with Secretary of the Treasury Steven Mnuchin on tax reform months ago. They have been a part of these discussions. It has not really been the same way over on the Senate side. And as you know, all but 3 Democratic senators signed a letter sort of uniting behind these stipulations that it couldn't, it had to be revenue neutral and it couldn't favor the wealthy. And those senators that are available are the ones that Vince mentioned, Senator Manchin, and then Senator Heitkamp, who was with the president in North Dakota on his last tax reform pitch trip, and then this one with Senator Donnelly. I think those 3 senators are open to compromise, and I think you'll find there are about 20 or so Democrats in the House that want to work in a bipartisan way on this in a different way than health care. On health care, Democrats said, if you're going for a repeal, we can't help you. We're only going to be with you on repair. And that has ended, as you know, in disaster. But I think on tax reform, you're going to see more bipartisanship.
We are waiting for the president to emerge from Marine One and board Air Force One again for this trip to Indiana, where he will be touting his tax plan. We understand that as he boarded Marine One, he made a few comments about what lies ahead. We will hope to have those remarks to play back for you in just a couple of minutes. Typically, Vince, when Democrats hear about tax cuts, they start, talking about tax cuts for the wealthy and so on and so forth. The White House and the proponents of this plan seem to be truly emphasizing, and here's the president coming down the steps of Marine One. They seem to be emphasizing that this is a middle-class tax cut. First of all, is it? I mean, are they being honest with us here? And secondly, will that blunt some of the potential criticism?
Well, changing both the AMT and removing the death tax will work to the benefit of the rich ultimately. And I think that's where you're going to see Democrats focus some of their fire here. But ultimately, it is hard to see how you couldn't have bipartisan support for a middle class and below tax cut. They're expanding that standard deduction, making sure that married couples especially will have a big old deduction at the lower end of the tax spectrum, meaning that a lot of people will pay 0 in federal income tax. More people will, who are on the lower end of the spectrum here. So that's a big deal, I think. And I think Democrats are going to want to support that. Look, we know, thanks to new polling just out today, that nearly something like 68% of the country supports an overhaul to the tax system. That's not a small number. Democrats sense this. They know that their base supports changes to taxes, and they're going to do what they can to insist that they don't give any breaks to the wealthy here. Yeah, the president, AB, has also been talking about simplification and saying that, a great number of Americans are going to be able to do their file their tax returns on a postcard, essentially, if this goes through. Now, that, to me, that seems impossible, but, it could happen. Most Americans, I would think, would get behind that kind of an idea.
That would be enormously popular, and as hard as it sounds to accomplish, it would really help Republicans after a very tough year where they haven't been able to walk across a room together. If they could actually cut people's taxes and then really simplify that code so that they can do it maybe on a postcard or 2, that would help people a lot. And that would be, that would be a huge accomplishment for Republicans.
Can I say one thing here? AB mentioned the idea that this be revenue neutral. The debate is going to center around this to some extent, clearly, and pay-fors and deductions. But remember this: the president of the United States and his team believe that they can grow the economy at a 3% rate year over year. That's where they believe they're going to see a lot of the money come in, a lot more tax revenue come in, because they're going to lower that corporate tax rate to 20%, and that's what they want anyway. So that's the thing to look out for. As you see the scoring here, assess whether or not the economy is growing as much as the president hopes it will. All right.
As we await the president to taxi out for this trip to Indianapolis, here are some remarks he made from the White House just before boarding Marine One.
Well, we have a man who's going to be a great senator, and I'm very happy with that. I spoke to him last night. I never met him. I never spoke to him. I'm very happy with him. And I have to say, Luther came a long way from the time I endorsed him, and he ran a good race, but Roy ran a really great race. And I know what they did with Mitch, and they used him very much in the campaign. But he works hard, and I'm sure things will work out. I just wanted to say, though, on health care, we have the votes for health care. We have one senator that's in the hospital. He can't vote because he's in the hospital.
You're talking about Cochran?
He can't vote because he's in the hospital. We have 2 other votes that are coming, and we will have them. But the problem is we can't have them by Friday because the reconciliation ends on Friday. So we'll have to do it in January and February. But I feel we have the votes. I'm almost certain we have the votes. But with 1 man in the hospital, we cannot display that we have them. Plus, some people want to go through a process just to make themselves feel better. That's okay.
What do you mean? What do you mean by that? Is Mitch McConnell in trouble? It's about how your aides are spending taxpayer money on the phone booth.
We're talking about health care. We're talking about health care.
What about Tom Price spent a lot of money on that charter plane? Is that cool?
I was looking into it, and I will look into it. And I will tell you personally, I'm not happy about it. I am not happy.
Is it a fire? What are you going to do about it, Mr. President?
I'm going to look at it. I am not happy about it, and I let him know it.
You have confidence? What about Mitch McConnell? Is he in trouble?
You'll have to ask senators.
Do you have confidence?
No, you're going to have to ask senators. So here's what I'm just saying. We're going right now to Indiana. We're going to introduce a tax plan that's the largest tax cut essentially in the history of our country. It's going to be something special. You already know some of the numbers. We're going to give you some of the additional numbers. But on health care, we have the votes. We can't do it now because we have somebody in a hospital. And we have great respect for that gentleman, by the way. He's a fantastic man.
But he was a yes.
We are going to do, he was a yes, that's why.
Why does it matter? I mean,
because he has to come here and vote. Because he can't come here and vote. In other words, he can't come here and vote because he's in the hospital. So here's the story.
You're talking about hospital,
wait,
right?
let me just say, yes, he's in the hospital. So we're going to do it in January and February because, as you know, we have the votes, but we can't go longer than Friday. What we're going to do is we will do the block grants, we will do the health care, we will get a longer process going for the couple of people that did want to see more process, even though they're a yes vote. But very importantly, I am also, during this period of a couple of months, I'm also going to meet with Democrats, and I will see if I can get a health care plan that's even better. So I will negotiate with Democrats, but from the Republican standpoint, we have the votes. We'll vote in January, February, or March.
Are you considering an executive order?
I am considering an executive order on associations, and that will take care of a tremendous number of people with regard to health care. And I'll probably be signing a very major executive order where people can go out, cross state lines, do lots of things, and buy their own health care. And that will be probably signed next week. It's being finished now. It's going to cover a lot of territory and a lot of people, millions of people.
May I ask a question about the travel ban?
John, go ahead.
Are you confident, sir, that Mitch McConnell can get health care across the finish line?
I think we're there now, John. I'll be honest. You look at the statement put out by Alaska, right? You saw that, by Lisa. You look at the other couple of statements. You know, we're only one off, maybe two. But we can't vote now, John. You probably didn't hear me because, as you know, one of our yes votes is in the hospital. I can't take him out of the hospital.
I'm just wondering if you have confidence in Senator McConnell.
I do have confidence in him, yes. I do have confidence.
Even though he couldn't get
But it's really not up to me. It's up to the Senate. But I do have confidence in him. I will say they used him in the race. And I was very honored, by the way, I was treated in the race, but they used him in the race. John, they used him in the race. And, you know.
On taxes, Mr. President, on tax reform, does your plan help the wealthy too much? There's criticism that
my plan is for the working people, and my plan is for jobs.
So you wouldn't benefit under your tax plan?
No, I don't benefit. I don't benefit.
You don't think people benefit?
In fact, very, very strongly, as you see, I think there's very little benefit for people of wealth.
The estate tax repeal is a benefit.
The estate tax is one of the things, and that's, if you look at it, for farmers and people with small business.
Mr. President, what do you say to the things that more and more have spending tax? You think long to be ready. You think that there's a member of Congress who doesn't deserve to have that continue to raise red and yellow to talk about people.
I don't see it, but we'll talk to you about that at a different time. So here's the point.
Are you worried that he's so incendiary, that he's such a firebrand that says these controversial things?
The point is this. Healthcare, we have it. We have the votes. Because of reconciliation, we have to wait till January, February, or March, which we'll do. But in the meantime, I will negotiate with Democrats to see if we can make a bipartisan bill. Yes,
One more on tax cut. Is the 20% corporate rate a red line to you? I know you say
very much a red line. In fact, I wanted to start at 15 so that we got 20. It just, the numbers were, 15 was so low we didn't take in the revenue. But I wanted 15 so we got 20. 20 is my number, so I'm not negotiating that number.
May I ask you a question about...
I am not going to negotiate. That's the number I wanted to get to. I wanted to start at 15 to get there. We really had to start there because of the complexity of the numbers. But 20 is a perfect number.
On Puerto Rico, Mr. President, why not lift the Jones Act like you did in Texas and
Well,
Florida?
we're thinking about that, but we have a lot of shippers and a lot of people and a lot of people that work in the shipping industry that don't want the Jones Act lifted. And we have a lot of ships out there right now. And I will tell you, the governor was very generous yesterday with his statement. And so was the mayor of San Juan, very, very generous with their statement. So we have a lot of people, and I'm going there on Tuesday, as you probably have heard. And Puerto Rico's a very difficult situation. I mean, that place was just destroyed. That's not a question of, gee, let's dry up the water, let's do this or that. I mean, that place was flat. That is a really tough situation. I feel so bad.
May I ask a question about the updated travel ban?
Yeah.
First of all, can you explain to us why Sudan was removed? And second of all, how does the travel ban work in North Korea that doesn't allow their people out of the country?
Yeah, the people allowed certain countries, but we can add countries very easily and we can take countries away.
What did Sudan do right?
As far as the travel ban is concerned, whatever it is, I want the toughest travel ban you can have. So I'll see you in Indiana. I'm going to go over some more points that have not been talked about. Are you all going? Is everyone going?
If you invite us, is there room?
Mr. President, can I go on the hurt on the NFL story? Because I know this is something you've been talking about a lot. You said back here in Charlottesville that those folks had the right to protest. Why doesn't Colin Kaepernick have his First Amendment right?
I think the NFL is in a box. I think they're in a really bad box. You look at what's happening with their ratings, you look at what's going, I mean, frankly, the only thing that's doing well in the NFL is the pregame, because everybody wants to see what's going on. The NFL is in a very bad box. You cannot have people disrespecting our national anthem, our flag, our country, and that's what they're doing. And in my opinion, the NFL has to change. Or you know what's going to happen? Their business is going to go to hell.
Are there First Amendment? Do you oppose protesting on the side of the NFL, Mr. President? Are there very fine people on the side of the NFL?
No, not at all. No, no. We have to respect our national anthem. We have to respect our country. And they're not respecting our country. And most importantly, the fans agree with me. I mean, largely the fans agree. But we have to show total respect for our national anthem, for our flag, for our country. We have to do it. And you can, there are plenty of places, and there are plenty, personally, when they're protesting during a football game, I think they can find better places, but they cannot do it during the national anthem. I am going to see, I'm looking at that very closely. I am not happy with it. I will tell you, I am not happy with it.
Well, over the roar of the Marine One jet engine, the president in a very chatty mood today. They're talking about everything from the continuing effort to repeal and replace Obamacare to the tax plan that he is about to trot out in Indianapolis, as well as his feelings about the NFL. More on that now with Heather.
Yes, let's talk a little bit more about this with our political panel. David Webb is a radio host on Sirius XM Patriot and a Fox News contributor, and Capri Cafaro is executive in residence at the American University School of Public Affairs and a former Ohio State Senate Minority Leader, as we see the president disappear right there. So let's talk about what he was ending on right there. You know, once again, more on this NFL controversy and the national anthem. He said, you know, he believes people need to respect our anthem and that he believes the majority of people agree with him. And according to the latest polls that I've seen, that is true. So do you think that that type of base is what influenced the race that just happened in Alabama? Because that's what we were going to talk about. Capri, I'll start with you.
I don't see the correlation, frankly, between, the debate that's going on in the NFL with taking a knee and this, discussion surrounding whether or not it's, disrespecting our national anthem and our flag and what happened in Alabama. I think that overall, the issue that happened in Alabama with the runoff that just occurred yesterday really was more about a commentary on two things. One, a challenge for the establishment in the United States Senate. I think that there's a lot of Republicans that are very disappointed in the fact that, Mitch McConnell and his colleagues, the establishment in Washington, have not been able to deliver on the promises that they've made, namely repeal and replacing Obamacare. And so, Roy Moore, the guy that won, beat Luther Strange. And, by all accounts, this Roy Moore is truly anti-establishment.
Yeah, so if the establishment can't get it done, maybe bringing in more folks like him can. And the president talked about that at the very beginning. Actually, he mentioned it several times. He's saying now that, yes, they do have the votes for health care, but someone is in the hospital, first of all, and he said that they will vote in January or February, that will happen. Also said on health care that he will negotiate with the Democrats. He said that he's considering executive orders, one of which will allow people to go across state lines to buy health insurance. So, David, what are your thoughts?
Well, we're looking at the possibility of a toolkit of executive orders along the way. The problem is that the Affordable Care Act is crashing and burning for many Americans. Put the politicians aside for a moment. I'm fed up with the Republican failure to get something through for a variety of reasons. Back to the aforementioned Roy Moore win and the dissatisfaction with the establishment. But when it comes to the health care reform, Americans need relief now. The tax package is part of that because we need more money flowing in the economy. But American jobs are being undercut. People aren't making hiring decisions. They can't for their families, and healthcare decisions, which are made on an almost daily basis for some, are not able. They're not given that access to care because of the failures of the Affordable Care Act, the lack of providers, the tripling in some cases, and 300% in Arizona in some areas, or in Alaska and others. So there has to be a toolkit put together, and this gives them time till January to come up with something.
And if I may, on that particular issue, just very briefly, I mean, I think that there are two areas of health care policy that could be handled, and some that actually need to be handled before September 30th. One of which is the reauthorization for Children's Health Insurance Program, which has to happen and was being worked on in a bipartisan manner prior to the situation with Graham Cassidy and trying to push that repeal and replace effort through. The other is this issue of the cost sharing reduction. And what that is basically is to enable the government to be able to inject cash essentially into the marketplace.
That's the problem. That right there is a big problem with a lot of the, with a lot of the conservative congressmen, specifically the Republicans.
But there have been discussions surrounding that issue in a bipartisan manner because that is something
the bipartisan Capri is a farce. But let's be really honest about this.
Well, David, we mentioned they have been trying since July. And they still haven't come up with a plan.
Right. And if there was really a bipartisan effort, we would have seen actually something presented by the Democrats as written proposals or something brought into committee, and we have actually not seen that. And the result of this is we are where we are. The Affordable Care Act stays the law of the land on Friday or on Saturday, so when September 30th comes around. And we don't have solutions.
But you know what doesn't happen?
The idea of taxing, but if I could finish, the idea of taxing the very Americans who can't afford the increased premiums, can't afford the outrageous deductibles before they reach the possibility of using what was given them under the Affordable Care Act to subsidize others is ridiculous. It is economically unsound, and it does not work.
It's not working. Like so many other things on Capitol Hill are not working, which is in part why Roy Moore won the race in Alabama. So what does that mean, if anything, for other elections moving forward?
Go ahead, David. No, fine.
All right. So
David, quickly.
All right. So I don't think it means much in the overall election. You had a primary race between two Republican candidates in a red state. I don't think it's much of an indicator in either direction.
Okay, Capri, you get to respond.
I agree with that. I don't think that there's any indication. I think what we've seen in a number of special elections, with the exception of what happened in a state Senate race in Florida that was a pickup by a Democrat just I think this week, I don't necessarily think that these special elections have any indication on the 2018 outcome as far as Democrats picking up seats. I do think that it would behoove Democrats to work together with Republicans in order to show that they are willing to govern.
Wouldn't
and so I've been saying that.
Nice.
It would be. It would be.
It would be, but I'm not hopeful. Hope is not a good strategy.
We can always have hope.
we always need hope.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Some new developments in the nuclear standoff with North Korea, where President Trump is sending his top diplomat as he calls for a united international front.
All nations must act now to ensure the regime's complete denuclearization.
Fox News alert, and take a look at I-80, Emeryville, California, not far from Berkeley. Police were chasing a murder suspect there on I-80, and right now all lanes of that very important arterial are closed. It's a major thoroughfare, traffic at a standstill, as you can see in these aerial pictures. Emeryville, California, in the East Bay area, where all of I-80 is shut down after police pursuit of a homicide suspect. We don't know anything more about why they've shut down the road, whether the suspect is barricaded somewhere or perhaps surrounded by police. We don't know. But Emeryville, I-80, a lot of people moving nowhere there right now. We'll keep an eye on it for you.
But in the meantime, construction began yesterday on some prototypes for President Trump's border wall. 8 different designs will be built and examined before one is finally picked for development. Adam Housley's live for us from the U.S.-Mexico border with more on that. Hi, Adam.
Yeah, Heather, we're going to give you the first live look in the country, actually. This is the first time anybody's been allowed in to give you kind of the beginning processes behind me. In fact, in the distance of this construction site, you'll actually see the original wall. It's outdated, dilapidated in many cases. Basically, it just stops vehicles. You can see, in fact, a couple of guys peeking over the wall right now, watching the construction take place from Tijuana. On the other side of being Tijuana. So that's the original wall, the first line of defense. The second line of defense is where the new walls will go. In fact, here in San Diego, they'll be putting it all the way down. The wall ends, actually, right where I'm standing, about a mile up the road. In the foreground is the actual construction site. There's actually 8 different sites, 6 different companies doing this. The actual area is probably the size of a small backyard, but you can see how they're starting the process of putting the forms in, the foundations in. We know that 4 of these concepts will be cement, 4 will be other types of material. They have 30 days to get these put up. The Border Patrol will then come out, DHS will come out, they'll inspect, they'll pick one, maybe they'll pick all 8. It really depends on what they decide to choose, and also taking into account new technology, topography, all the other issues as well. That, again, will start, that evaluation process will begin in 30 days. All right here, you'll see basically a small piece of each one, Heather, before the next step, which is then to start the Trump border wall. Roughly 1,300 miles is still without any sort of barrier. And so these will not only start going up in that 1,300 miles, but also replacing some of the older walls that exist, like here in San Diego, Heather.
It was a big campaign promise. A lot of people waiting for that to start. Thank you very much, Adam.
All right. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson heads to Beijing today amid the escalating standoff with North Korea. The White House denies the regime's assertion that the U.S. has declared war on North Korea, but President Trump not backing down on his rhetoric, saying the North could force his hand.
We are totally prepared for the second option, not a preferred option, but if we take that option, it will be devastating. I can tell you that, devastating for North Korea. That's called the military option. If we have to take it, we will.
Let's bring in Oriana Schuyler Mastro, an AEI visiting scholar and Georgetown University assistant professor of security studies. The North has said that we have declared, the United States has declared war on them. I'm just curious as to your take as to why they are taking that position.
You know, this has been a whirlwind of a week with all this escalating rhetoric. And I think what the North Korean position shows is it's not just words. When the United States president makes statements that suggest that a military option is not only on the table, but potentially imminent to other countries that can seem a great threat. Also, the United States has taken significant that support President Trump's position, for example, flying U.S. bombers the farthest north of the DMZ that they've ever flown in the 21st century.
Well, the North has said that they now have the right, in their view, to shoot down any bombers or other, United States air assets, even in international airspace. If they were to do that, it would bring on the worst kind of retaliation, would it not, from the U.S.?
I think this is one of the primary concerns about escalating the rhetoric between the United States and North Korea unnecessarily, is it really opens up the possibility of miscalculation. I think the United States making such strong statements vindicates Kim Jong-un's position that he really needs nukes to ensure his survival. And maybe he's wrong. Maybe the pursuit of those nuclear weapons will actually lead to his downfall. But such a miscalculation is going to be bad not only for North Korea, but also for the United States and South Korea.
At the same time, multiple administrations, both Republican and Democrat, have tried to deal with North Korea. There hasn't really been, to my memory, a credible military threat put out there on the table. And we've seen North Korea, tear up nuclear agreements and just continue to thumb its nose at the international community.
I think you're right that currently this is the most credible threat the United States has probably put forth to North Korea in quite some time, at least since the Clinton era. However, I think the strategy that such a credible threat will lead Kim back to the negotiating table, that is a big miscalculation. And the worst case scenario, we find ourselves at war, and that leads to unsafety for not only millions of South Koreans, but 180,000 American citizens that live in Korea. And best case scenario, it makes it even harder to get Kim to the table because basically the United States is losing its credibility in upholding these agreements since President Trump went in front of the UN to say that we might back out of the Iran deal.
What about the new sanctions that have been voted in at the UN? How confident are you that those might finally force Kim to toe the line?
I think it's very difficult that economic sanctions will push any regime, and especially this one, to give up nuclear weapons. The bottom line is, at this point, especially with this rhetoric, Kim Jong-un feels like he needs these weapons to maintain his power and ensure his survival, and no amount of economic suffering is going to be able to outweigh those calculations.
Oriana Schuyler Mastro, the AEI visiting scholar at Georgetown. Thank you.
Thank you.
Still to come, the feds making arrests alleging a widespread corruption scheme in the NCAA. 10 people facing federal charges. And now one university has just placed its legendary basketball coach on administrative leave. Is more fallout coming in college hoops? Plus,
what are you doing? Close your pants and let's go. You ripped my pants.
It's happened again. A woman forcibly removed from a flight. Why the police had to drag her away.
Some crazy video from a Southwest flight bound for Los Angeles. The trouble started when a female passenger reportedly told the crew she was deathly allergic to a pair of dogs on board and demanded that they be taken off the plane. Well, officials then asked her for a medical certificate showing she was safe to fly. When she couldn't provide them with that, they asked her to leave. Then this happened.
Show them that you're walking. I can't walk. Walk. He's got my leg.
Walk. Right here. I have your leg. Right there.
Don't touch me.
Walk. Go carefully. Just go softly.
Just please show them that you're walking.
There we go. Just walk. Let it go.
Walk. I'm a professor. What are you doing? What are you doing?
Jeez, lady, get off the plane. Get the complaint later.
Not trying.
Well, some fellow passengers, as you heard there, urged her to cooperate. Southwest is publicly apologizing to the customer. We're not sure if she apologized to the dogs.
Or how long that delay was to take off. Well, Fox News alert for you now. Louisville men's basketball coach Rick Pitino has just been placed on administrative leave. This is huge news, along with the school's athletic director.
Got that? Well, Louisville was implicated in a federal investigation into bribery and corruption in college basketball. The Justice Department arrested 4 NCAA basketball coaches yesterday, and they are among 10 people facing federal criminal charges, including a top executive at Adidas. Here's the acting Attorney General of New York.
Coaches at some of the nation's top programs soliciting and accepting cash bribes. Managers and financial advisors circling blue chip prospects like coyotes, and employees of one of the world's largest sportswear companies secretly funneling cash to the families of high school recruits.
Let's bring on our legal panel to talk about it. Criminal defense attorney and former head county prosecutor Bob Bianchi and criminal defense attorney Richard St. Paul. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you.
So, Richard, I'm going to start with you on this. We took a look at a picture just a moment ago. The 4 assistant coaches involved in this, we can tell you that they were from Auburn University, Oklahoma State University, University of Arizona, and University of Southern California. How Louisville comes into play with this, the federal prosecutors say that at least 3 top high school recruits were promised payments as much as $150,000 using supplies or using money supplied by Adidas. The 2 schools were not named, but the details that were given implicate Miami and Louisville. So what do you think about this? I mean, there have been scandals before, but what about this latest one?
Well, look, there's been major scandals before. If you remember, Joe Paterno covered up a whole child abuse and sex scandal to save his team. I mean, we're talking money here, and we're talking greed. College sports is $4 billion, over $4 billion industry. You have coaches with private planes making 6 figures. There's no way to take greed out of this game except for maybe looking at paying for players. We've seen greed permeate through politician lives, religious figures, lawyers, doctors. When there is money, there's no legislation or criminal penalty that's going to stop. But maybe we can curb what's happening in college football, which is a disgrace, by paying college football players. I paid college football, and I got a scholarship, but I can tell you, if I was paid, that would be helpful too.